Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Today we're busting some of the biggest history myths you've probably believed your whole life. From the Titanic to George Washington's cherry tree story, we're diving into the truth behind the lies. So, let's get right into it. Number 8. The Titanic Myth. We all know the famous story of the Titanic, right? A massive luxury ship, considered unsinkable, hits an iceberg and goes down on its very first voyage. But the truth is, the Titanic wasn't just unlucky. It was a disaster waiting to happen long before it ever touched the iceberg. First, let's talk about the steel. The material used to build the ship was low quality, and became extremely brittle in cold water, making the hull far more fragile than it should have been. Then there's the crew. They received multiple warnings about icebergs in the area but kept pushing full speed ahead, ignoring basic safety. And don't forget the lifeboats, far too few, because designers thought extra lifeboats would spoil the view. So in reality, the iceberg wasn't the only cause. It was simply the final straw that exposed a perfect storm of mistakes. Number 7. The Flat Earth Myth. You've probably heard this one before. Back in the Middle Ages, people thought the Earth was flat, and Columbus bravely set out to prove it was round. Sounds dramatic, right? Well, it's completely false. In fact, educated people had known the Earth was round since ancient times. Great minds like Pythagoras and Aristotle were writing about it more than 2,000 years ago. Even a mathematician named Eratosthenes measured Earth's circumference way back in 240 BC, using nothing but shadows and clever math. Pretty impressive. So where did the flat Earth idea even come from? Surprisingly, it wasn't from medieval people at all. In the 1800s, some writers invented the myth to make the Middle Ages look primitive and ignorant. The truth is, Columbus wasn't proving the Earth's shape, he simply guessed its size wrong and stumbled across America instead. Number 6. Napoleon was short. When you hear the name Napoleon Bonaparte, you probably picture a tiny, angry man with a massive ego. The so-called Napoleon complex. Right? Well, not quite. The truth is, Napoleon wasn't short at all. He actually stood around 5 feet 6 inches, about 168 centimeters, which was perfectly average height for a Frenchman in the early 1800s. So why the confusion? It mostly came from a mix-up between French and British measurements. When the French said he was 5 feet 2 inches in their system, the British translated that into their own inches and made it seem like he was unusually small. Sensing an opportunity, British cartoonists mocked him in political propaganda, portraying him as this tiny figure of rage. To make matters worse, Napoleon often surrounded himself with tall imperial guards, which only exaggerated the illusion. In reality, Napoleon wasn't short, he just had really tall friends and really mean enemies. Number 5. The Salem Witch Burnings. If you've seen movies or TV shows about the Salem Witch Trials, you've probably pictured witches tied to wooden stakes and burned alive in front of huge crowds. But here's the truth, none of that ever happened in Salem. The infamous trials in 1692 were certainly real and horrifying, but the punishments were different. 19 people were executed by hanging, one man named Giles Corey was brutally pressed to death with heavy stones, and several others died in jail while waiting for trial. But not a single person was burned. So where did the burning idea come from? That's borrowed from Europe. Across Europe, witch burnings were a common method of execution. But in colonial America, English law was followed, and that law dictated that convicted witches were to be hanged, not burned. Hollywood may love the flames, but history tells a darker, different story. Number 4. The Thanksgiving Myth. When you think of Thanksgiving, you probably imagine pilgrims and Native Americans sitting together in harmony, sharing turkey, corn, and pumpkin pie in a perfect moment of peace. But the real story is far less cheerful. The so-called First Thanksgiving feast of 1621 wasn't planned as a symbol of friendship at all. In fact, the Wampanoag people only showed up because they heard gunfire. The pilgrims were shooting off guns in celebration of a successful harvest. What followed wasn't lasting peace. The relationship between Native Americans and the settlers quickly turned violent, marked by disease, wars, and the forced removal of native communities from their lands. And here's the twist: Thanksgiving wasn't even a holiday until President Abraham Lincoln officially declared it in the 1860s, over 2 centuries later, during the Civil War, as a way to bring the divided nation together. Number 3. Nero playing the fiddle. One of the most famous legends from ancient Rome is that Emperor Nero stood by, playing his fiddle, while the Great Fire of Rome reduced the city to ashes. Sounds like the ultimate example of a careless ruler, right? Well, the truth is, it never happened. For starters, fiddles and violins didn't even exist in the 1st century. They wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. And Nero? He wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He was about 30 miles away. When news reached him, he rushed back, opened his gardens for survivors who lost their homes, organized relief efforts, and even helped rebuild sections of the city. So why does the myth still stick? After Nero's death, his political enemies wrote histories painting him as a villain. The fiddling Nero was pure propaganda, not fact. Number 2. Let them eat cake. You've probably heard the story. When Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, was told that her people had no bread, she coldly replied, "Let them eat cake." It's a line that's been used for centuries to show how out of touch and heartless she supposedly was. But the truth? She never said it. The phrase actually first appeared in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, written when Marie Antoinette was just a child living in Austria, not even in France yet. Decades later, during the French Revolution, angry revolutionaries spread the rumor to turn her into the perfect villain, foreign-born, wealthy, and living in luxury while common people starved. In reality, Marie Antoinette wasn't the monster people imagined. Historical evidence suggests she cared about the poor and even tried to help them. But propaganda is powerful, and the cake quote stuck forever. Number 1. George Washington and the Cherry Tree. Almost every American kid grows up hearing the charming story of young George Washington. He's given a shiny little hatchet, runs outside in excitement, and chops down his father's favorite cherry tree. When confronted, he bravely says, "I cannot tell a lie, father. I did it with my little hatchet." Cute, right? Too bad, it never happened. The tale was invented in 1806 by Mason Locke Weems, one of Washington's early biographers. Weems wanted to add a heartwarming childhood story that would highlight Washington's honesty and virtue. Readers loved it so much that it quickly became American folklore, repeated in schools and children's books for generations. The real George Washington, however, was far too serious and practical to enjoy such a dramatic, moralizing tale. The cherry tree story is pure fiction, crafted to build a hero's image, not to tell the truth.